Look, this is, as those of you who've been on previous sessions, this is hopefully more of a conversation type approach to this session today. So I'll introduce each of the speakers, get them to share a little bit about themselves. If you've got any questions, or if you want to make a comment into whatever's been said there, please share it in the chat. We'll keep an eye on the chat, and we might sort of, if there's someone has something interesting to say, we might invite them in to the session as well to share or ask their question directly to our guests. But yeah, look, so we're just going to kind of keep this as a fairly informal conversation, if you like, and hopefully you can participate in it as well. So I might just go through and introduce each of our speakers independently, as I said, individually, and just then give them a chance to share a little bit about themselves as we go. So the first guest here is Vincent McKenzie. Vincent is Bardi from his mother's side and a Jabba-Jabba man on his father's side. His home is in the Jarinjin community located in the Dampier Peninsula in Western Australia, and his clan group is the Ulungun clan located south of this community. He grew up speaking Bardi language and immersed in Bardi culture before learning English as a teenager and going to study in Perth and Darwin. He's now a culture and language teacher at Christ the Primary School in Broome, Western Australia. He's passionate about passing on language and culture to his students. So welcome, Vincent. Thanks very much for joining us from over in Broome. Can you tell us briefly, how you came to be in your current role, and what is it that motivates you and enlivens your passion in your work?
Hello there. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yep, we got you, Vincent.
Okay. Yeah. Getting into this role is small community of 300, growing on to more numbers. We're in the center between two other communities in the peninsula. We're strong in our culture and our language, and starting up in the Catholic schools up here, we weren't allowed to bring our culture into our schools. Until the late 70s, until 80s, they gave us permission to bring it back with the help of our old people, and there was a big gap between there that, we weren't allowed to bring it into our schools and into the community. So during the 80s, they bring it into the schools, and then that's where, in the age of when we were back in the schools, and that language was taught. Our parents before us weren't allowed to speak, so that's that 5-year gap. And I think it's mainly across everywhere that there was a gap between that area where from the 60s to the 80s, language weren't allowed to be taught into the Catholic system because it was an evil language, or a language that was forbidden to be taught in the Catholic schools.
Thanks, Vincent. Just briefly, can you tell us, what sort of base in terms of language of the students there? Have you got students that are like you, strongly immersed in language and culture, or are there students that you're sort of teaching that to for the first time?
Yeah, there's two different areas of teaching language. There is a beginner and an advanced one. For an area in 0 to 3, you teach in the beginning, a beginner language. So you're just doing your normal greetings, talking, and introducing the language to the small one. From year 3 up to year 5, you're in the middle because they're a little bit more advanced. You're adding on to the language. So it's more instructional language that I teach in the classroom. It's more writing, animbar, ular, listening, speaking, and more of the two ways of learning. So I bring the cultural and the language side in the school and the Western side and mixing it in together.
Thanks, Vincent. Well, we'll return to some of the programs and things that you do with the students a little bit later in the session. The next guest is Marlon Riley. Marlon is a descendant of the Kuku Yalanji Aboriginal peoples of Cape York Peninsula. His ancestors were taken away from their country as part of the stolen generations. Marlon grew up in Brisbane and only reconnected with his country as a teenager. For over 20 years, he's worked as a cultural tutor at Brisbane Catholic Education through the Ngutana-Lui Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Cultural Studies Centre. The centre was established to promote reconciliation through education and to develop and enhance cultural knowledge, understanding and respect for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So thanks very much for joining us today, Marlon. Can you tell us briefly how you came to be in your current role and what is it that sort of motivates you in your work?
Well, first of all, Yalada Yundu to you all. Hello to you all. It's good to be a part of this. I'm part of Brisbane Catholic Education for 20 years. We service Aboriginal, not just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, but all students within the Catholic education system on the cultural curriculum. But we also work with the state education and opened up to independent schools and colleges, and as well as tertiaries. So yeah, enjoy it for this 20 years. Don't plan on leaving too much. But today we in service the staff of many of the schools about the culture, and today's theme was intergenerational trauma and cultural kinships and spiritualities, and that. But yeah, we mostly follow the curriculum when it comes to teaching culture, but we also impose our own teachings within that too. So yeah, Michael, yeah.
What is it? Because you're part of Brisbane Catholic Education, how does that sort of Catholic connection, that Catholic faith and identity come into the centre's work?
So the creation of the centre in 20 plus years was based on the AICC, the Aboriginal Islander Catholic community, and they wanted to create a place of reconciliation or a space to bring together non-Indigenous and or First Nations, non-First Nations people together as a bridging gap. They would say the initial idea was, the Catholic community itself. It was Islander back in the day, because we acknowledge the South Sea Islanders too, and their contributions to our country. And since then, the centre's grown up. We've serviced over 40,000 students just within the last year. This year, we're really hard worked at the moment. So averaging 120 students per day. Of year levels of schools that come through here. But the whole concept of the centre was, we say, reconciliation through education. And it's just to give the students, the teachers, all the staff feelings of being a part of a culture, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander culture, just to bridge that gap of understanding. And that's the real reason for the centre, is to have that sharing. The Ngutana-Lui, the centre, means to teach, but us as the tutors, we tend to think it's our goal to not just teach but to share, and you have that, not so much that structural curriculum style of teaching, but the cultural way of teaching, and let the children witness and be a part of that.
Thank you. We'll hear a little bit more about that later. Our next guests, both joining us from Cairns Catholic Education. Jennifer King is a descendant of the Kuku Yalanji Nation, Butchulla, Dirrabal, and Western Yalanji peoples of Queensland. Jennifer's connection to Cairns, Gimai, Woollabura, Lidinji country is through her great-grandparents. I apologise if I haven't got quite the pronunciation there. They were forced, her grandparents were removed under policies known as the stolen generation, and she's 5 generations removed from her ancestral land. Jennifer is an educator, communicator, and collaborator. In her role as consultant for First Nations education, Catholic Education Diocese of Cairns, she's passionate about working closely with staff and students to share First Nations knowledge and embed First Nations perspectives across the curriculum. Jennifer takes a holistic approach in her practice by serving staff and students in academic, cultural, social, and spiritual health and well-being. So, look, thanks very much for joining us, Jennifer. How did you come to be working in your current role, and what is it that drives you in your work?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I guess I have to give a little bit of a backstory. I worked for 8.5 years in an all-girls Catholic college and moved over to Catholic Education Services about 5.5 months ago. So I'm quite new in my role here. What motivates me for working in Catholic education is really, for me, initially it's around being really safe and feeling culturally safe in the environment, to be able to use my voice, to speak up, to honour those that have come before us, our old people. And also motivates me, obviously, is the students that we have in the college. And when I say that, I'm speaking of those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. I've just really passionate about them being really strong in their cultural pride, cultural identity, because once they're really strong within themselves and are proud of that, that actually really enables them to have the confidence to learn. So for me, that's really vital, that we've got to have that foundation there for our young people. Have a quick look here. So I think that, the other key, of course, is around educating our First Nations young people is a key element for future opportunities, and also to be able to make those life choices. So really excited about the work that I do, and it's a really great workplace. Yeah.
Thanks, Jennifer. And sitting next to Jennifer there is Adrienne Innes-Simpson. Adrienne was a teacher at St Monica's College, Cairns until 2022, teaching English, visual art and religious education, as well as holding various management and leadership roles. She was most recently assistant principal of religious education at the school for 12 years. She's building on her love of teaching religious education in her current role as leader of formation religious education in Catholic Education Cairns. Fundamental to her work is the vision of CEDC for every student to benefit from engaging contemporary and personally relevant religious education curriculum. Adrienne, thank you. Can you tell us, your passion particularly for this area and what motivates you in your work?
Thank you. I was not quite Cairns born, but certainly Cairns raised since about grade 3 onwards, with my earlier years in Tully and my family connections up in Mossman. So I've got a love of this space, I suppose. Do have 3 aunts that are all Sisters of Mercy. So certainly that connection to Catholic faith in my upbringing made, I suppose, my choice of teaching in a Catholic space it's almost like coming home when I moved back into a Catholic school after teaching in a state school for a while. It's part of my identity as who I am as a person. The beauty of it is that Jennifer and I actually taught together at our previous school, so we come into this space together, I suppose, in that opportunity to build on that relationship that we started back in our college and our work in that space. So always, I think for both of us, it's the students that's at the heart, and even the roles that I'm in now, while I'm working with staff, it's working with staff so that they can provide opportunities for students and engagement and access for students. So it always comes back to that space of the people that we have in front of us in our classrooms.
Well, we might start, just pick up on the point, particularly Jennifer, I think, was talking about, of, you know, Cairns in particular has quite a large population of Indigenous students, First Nation students in your schools. What are some of the initiatives you've seen or perhaps conducted in Cairns in terms of being more inclusive of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and perspectives, particularly in the RE or formation space? What some of the things you've seen done there?
Yeah, so those initiatives have actually been quite broad in the sense of within the school college community. So those initiatives really have been around creating yarning evenings where people have an opportunity to understand who our First Nations students are. Those type of gatherings are really important for the whole community. You know, outside of that, there's also events that we have within the school community. Simple things like getting students to create Indigenous designed shirts, which the Indigenous students have done. That initiative actually has been really important because the Indigenous students then see a reflection of something as part of their culture, and it creates conversation. We did have another initiative where one of the First Nations students said that she would like to do a fundraiser for one of the communities up in Lockhart River. And so she organised for her aunt, who was making Indigenous designed earrings, to sell those at school in our whole school community. The sales from that went back to Lockhart River, to the Puya Foundation there. But more importantly, the feedback from the teachers was that they found that their relationship changed with some of the First Nations students, and that when they were wearing the earrings, it actually created conversation. And that's where things really start, doesn't it? So those initiatives have, you know, been small initiatives and quite large ones, have really worked well. On a broader sense, we've actually had connections with the 2020 Truth Conference, where we had our First Nation students perform a dance, which was really around storytelling, and it was around stolen generation. So again, it's about educating the broader community. In that sense, it was educators from throughout Australia.
Thank you. Adrienne, is anything you want to add?
A lot of the work that happens in school also then needs to be supported at a diocesan level. So it's not just what's happening at schools; it's what's happening from the top down. If you don't have your Centre for Education, so in our case, Cairns CES on board, then those initiatives, I suppose, are isolated. So from a diocesan level, we start with our Encounter Catholic Identity Framework, which is sort of the foundations of who we are and what our Catholic identity in that. But embedded in this, we draw on First Nations people's way of valuing, being, knowing and doing. And those metaphors of respect, reflect, embrace, connect become the foundations of everything we do in our schools and how we view our work. We sort of work from that perspective. If you get your staff on board and you train your staff, then that's what's going to filter down into your classroom. So making sure that staff are educated, have capacity, feel comfortable when opportunities arise in the classroom to embed those First Nations perspectives, and also inviting people into their space.
And with, I guess, strong local representatives in a lot of schools, I think there'd be that opportunity to actually bring people into those spaces quite often, I'd imagine.
Yeah, that's actually a really key thing, because it is about connecting with community, respecting, our elders, traditional custodians. So that's really vital, whether it's actually going to be, at events or simply in the classroom settings. They have to align with each other for that true sense of really of sharing knowledge and reconciliation.
However, these people are also very busy, so you don't get to shy away just because you can't bring someone into your classroom. You've still got to, do the hard work yourself as well.
We might talk a little bit more generally about that in a moment, but just to it's I guess it's fairly obvious in Cairns where you've got a large presence of First Nations people, but in Australia in general, there's around 300,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Catholics. In the census, it's the one segment of the Catholic population that's actually growing in number. Marlon, you went to Rome for the canonisation of Mary MacKillop. You've been involved in the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Catholic Council formation activities for teachers for many years. How do you bring together that sort of, that family? How does, I guess, your First Nations Indigenous culture shape your Catholicism, and what are some of the things that you bring together in that and share with teachers that are coming to the Centre for Formation Activities?
So when I talk culture, I kind of fuse it in a way in an explanation of law, in LORE, the law of the heart and what our heart tells us, but also written law, which is the Bible. And so I'll correlate the two together. Our connection to the canonization was previously I was a Nazi youth leader for the Catholic Council, and I had so I was part of the youth, and my contributions were cultural contributions and through sacraments, through the church of like a smoking ceremony in representing of penitential rite and water blessings and stuff like that. But when we was going over to Rome, the sisters of St. Joseph's had invited us, and it was myself and people from Vincent's country too, from Broome, from Bardi, people from New South Wales. So we went over as a contingent to represent the youth. And when we was over there was various sort of parts that we had to participate in, rather than the canonization itself. So we opened up the Vatican Museum. There was an exhibit that was presented by the ACU of artworks. So they asked us to participate with that. The Thanksgiving ceremony, after the day of the canonization, we had a Thanksgiving ceremony. So we participated in a cultural concept in that mass. It was a mass for all Australians, but we helped open that mass and also had in occasions after that. Catholic faith to myself, growing up, my mother, when she was raised by Woorabinda Mission, she learnt church, and her church, they weren't allowed to have culture. And so she grasped onto the church as a way of a foundation for her. And when we grew up as children under her, and she would share that with us, and that was her way of not only disciplining us, but teaching us the rightful ways. And but then when I was in the church, I was actually witness to a good priest who was actually a good storyteller, and his homilies were that of Aboriginal stories as well as the Bible. So when it comes to gospel reading and it come to homilies and things like that, he would often relate them with his experience with Aboriginal communities. So that's where I became a storyteller. I told him this last year, why I'm a storyteller, is not more so through Aboriginal dreaming stories, it's through his style of sharing the dreaming with that of the Catholic faith. So fusing that together, went to good school, went to where Vincent teaches there today, Christ the King, I also went and attended a Christ the King school in Brisbane, and at that time when I attended it in my year 6 year there, it was the very first school at that time in the 90s or late 80s, sorry, that an Aboriginal flag was never flown in a school. So I felt that there was a connection between myself and that school, and we had the children being picked up from all around Brisbane just to attend that school, Indigenous, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. So in saying that, I grew up to learn it through primary school, and as an adult, like I didn't find my culture. I knew culture, didn't know my story as such. So I was learning stories of the local Yagara people, Waka Waka people, which was northwest of Brisbane. So learning dances from uncles from there, and but then I had a calling when I was as a late teenager to head back up to Western Yalanji country, where Jennifer's mob belong to, Bubudi, Wungadare. So yeah, and that was a blessing to feel to be back on country. So I learned to learn both ways. In my later teenagers, I learned about culture, but then beforehand I learned how to respect rituals and sacraments, because when I went to primary school, Catholic school, but also secondary school, the Edmund Rice way of life was a way of respecting, and I tell that then, yeah, learning the foundations of presentation systems through the Edmund Rice, and then learning culture, and it all works together. And that's why I teach today, not directly teach it in that manner, but when I can, when it comes to conversations about faith, I share both sides.
Thank you, Marlon. Jennifer or Vincent, do you want to share a little bit about your own, how you connect faith and culture together?
Yeah. I grew up going to Catholic schools, but I think for me there was always that disconnect, and I think it's because at home we were Aboriginal, but at school we weren't. So it was a very disconnect. It wasn't until I guess I was a little later in life where I really, my spiritual connection to my Aboriginality and who I am, and having, certain gifts which I've learned along the way have really helped me to be really strong within myself. So for me, when I do go into the classrooms, where that invitation might come to share my spirituality and my journey, I think that it's really important where, as an Aboriginal person, that I can share that. And that's really what the students need to hear, because they will at some point in their own life have their own journey. So I think that's, really important, that as an Aboriginal educator, my spiritual connection is really at my heart, and that I'm able to share that with the students. And I've often done that over the years, for many years in Adrian's classes. And initially when we started, I would do these PowerPoints, and I would be really trying to get some research in it. But then, it became authentic when we removed that and we started having it as a yarning circle. And I would just be sharing around, my spirituality. And then, Adrian, can also align how that the path that Jesus has walked is very similar. A lot of those struggles are very similar.
And then it often opened up that space in where students felt comfortable in bringing their story into that space, because we, Jennifer shared part of hers, I'd, made the links or connections or broken up part of mine, and then they sort of felt like, I'll ask or I'll contribute, because it was conversational, not presentation. So it shifted that space.
Yeah.
Thank you. Vincent, did you want to share just how you bring culture and faith together in your yourself, and how that sort of sits with you working in a Catholic school?
Yeah, I think for myself is learning and growing up in both ways, up here with strong cultural people, still have ceremonies and Dreamtime stories that still passed on. For myself is that when I bring it into education, into the school, I talk about two-way learning. So when you go through your ceremonies and that, you go through stages. When you go through your Catholic faith, you go through stages. Your first stages are your baptism. In the Aboriginal way, it's your first initiation of manhood and through woman. Your second stages are getting your color of your paint on your body, which that is your first reconciliation. Your third stages, receiving the first communion, and you've been given your totem or your clan. And your last stages are your confirmation before you reach into adulthood to marriage. And with the ceremony, you're past your painted stages. You're up in the top with the lower bosses, senior people. And then at the end, for us, we have red paint that would put you into adulthood, ready for your marriage. And it's just connecting those two stories together, and teaching our young people that we've got two ways learning,
Thank you. At the NATSIC gathering last year, you shared a video that you'd put together that was drawing on local Bardi language and had a story from Bardi culture to explore themes around Laudato Si. And unfortunately, we can't share it today. It would have been great. But can you tell us a little bit about that project? How it came about and how you put that together?
Yeah, so for that project, what I did with the video, it was called Creation. And last year, NAIDOC team was get up, stand up, and show up. And so we thought of a story. We went back to our elders. We said, is there a story that we can tell? And they said, yeah, we can tell about our dreaming story, our Minu story that created two young fellas that traveled the country right down to south and up to north and passed all the traditional knowledge, songs, dreaming stories. And we said, here we can manage this story about our culture and Laudato Si, because it talks about on country, healing yourself, connecting to your spiritual body and your mind and soul, And then that two story made up together. And then we said, we're going to create one creation story where this man send these two young people down to look after the land and country. And they took so much things that the other people said, we're going to call out for our elder, our boss, to come and help. So they called back for the creation man, to come back and heal the country, which I think with that story, when we take too much from our country, we need time to heal our country as well as ourselves.
Thank you. A project like that, I suppose, has that been shared mostly in the community? Is that being shared more widely? Where is that? What's the plans for that project?
So I forgot to mention earlier on, I'm working with the WAREC mob, and we're going out to communities and other Catholic school, myself and a few other members. We're going out and teaching other schools how to connect your dreaming stories with the Laudato Si and creating your own history of making a clip or a video scene. Every First Nation around Australia has their own story that they could tell that can connect to Laudato Si.
It's a fantastic initiative. Marlon or Jennifer and Adrian, is there anything that's similar in terms of your dioceses that you can talk about, similar projects to that in terms of bringing together traditional stories and other broader themes of justice and faith?
Do you want to go first, Jennifer?
I actually like to speak to this.
Yeah. So I'll there's a few initiatives, but I'll also take the opportunity to do a plug for the cathedral windows if you're ever in Cairns. There's 24 huge stained glass windows that tell the story of creation through from the Big Bang to sort of life everlasting. But part of that story, people that are represented in that window are First Nations people living on Cairns community as part of that story. So it moves that Genesis story into sort of a local context of what life is like in our area, and very much incorporates that element of First Nations, so that when you're talking about life story, there's a visual representative there that allows students to actually see themselves in the window if they're First Nations, and see themselves as part of that Genesis story, not just from that religious background. Other initiatives that we do working with staff is actually taking staff to either in-country days run by our First Nations elders, or on-country experiences where they have opportunities then to connect with land and connect with the stories of our region, so that they then influence, I suppose, or have impact on how they teach and how they bring their students into that space.
Thank you, Marlon.
Yeah, with us is yarning circles, and it's more about explaining. We do have a story that belongs to Brisbane here that's very close to the Genesis story. So what we do is we dissect, or not dissect, but we sort of go through passages in the Bible that can correlate with stories that we know. I know there's, like, we will say, like for example, Cain and Abel. We have a Cain and Abel within not so much Yalanji. These warriors did walk through Yalanji country, but more so the Yirinji and Jabba-Jabba country, and that's the story of Guyala and Damari, two brothers that were quite opposite to each other, and the bad one being Damari, and his brother Guyala, being Cain onto Abel. But Guyala, who we probably would in the relationship to the Bible story, would be he's the sea eagle, and he ended up flying over and naming everything. But we got the law from Damari because of his behavior and the way that he challenged the goodness by being opposite to that, and we learnt law through his actions. Because Guyala left Damari on his own because of their disagreement with each other, and Guyala didn't want to be a part of it, so he flew up closest to the heavens and he looked down too, and named things for the people. Whereas we always see Damari as that one, this is how you should act, and or how not to act. He was the prime example, and action is really is the concept of law, how we deal with one another's feelings, and how to contemplate those feelings upon each other or with each other, and so we tap into specific parts, even, and it doesn't mean Catholic faith. Also, it could be the concept of the rainbow serpent, how in the Buddhist culture in Cambodia, the Nagi being a snake of destruction, but it was a serpent. There's many versions of serpents appearing in many stories, so it's just it talks about just dissecting and just getting them to understand that. But the whole concept is about feelings, and we use dreaming stories as a way of, this animal represents this sort of way of life and this thought. God talks to us in many ways. He doesn't just talk to us through scripture. He talks to us through the environment and through signs of nature. So that's what we kind of tap into, those type of feelings and how to use them with the Bible or with culture, and how they can work for each other. When you're in need of scripture, then you have this particular verse, but when you're in need of just being with nature or getting the answers to come to you, what you wish that God would talk to you, then we use that through culture.
Thanks, Marlon. Look, it's incredibly rich area. A couple of people have mentioned that they were really interested to hear, Vincent, about the link between, the sacraments and rites of initiation, and how that's drawn in the school context there in Broome. And we're asking, are there any resources that are available out there that can help teachers in other Catholic schools make that connection? Is there anything anyone is aware of that you could share or post about here? Might be a gap.
I think it's really, it's about connecting with the elders of your area, because obviously, what's that word? Not copyright, but people like to share their stories in person. Those stories can easily get changed when it's not coming from the individual themselves. So, yeah, I would say connecting with elders and, traditional custodians in your area is really important.
And certainly the diocesan level, there would be Aboriginal Catholic people and officers in most dioceses, I'd imagine.
I say when it comes to a resource, there are places of study like Nungalinyo in Darwin and Wantup, I hope I pronounced that properly, up there in Cairns, where there are, it's not necessarily just a Catholic faith, but it's the Christian faith, where people are making their connection and using their theologies and kind of learning through what Christian faith is, but also having the respect of acknowledging their own way of life when it comes back to returning to their communities. So if you're looking for a resource, maybe tapping into probably into them and seeing how you communicate with them and see what resources that they use, because they use it in academic sense, and I guess with academic you need resources as well as faith, but yeah, resources as well.
Thank you. Just in general, what are some of the things, not just in your home dioceses, but say places like Melbourne, Sydney, where other people will be joining us from. What are some of the things that Catholic schools can do to sort of better highlight and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives, particularly in RE and faith formation, but just bring that into the students' awareness in schools? In particular, I guess, in areas where there's less, where the Indigenous population is smaller and there's not necessarily as much around. Is there the strong connection in the school? What are some of the ways that schools can sort of access that?
I guess for me, like my advice to begin with is really around, if you are really genuine about embedding, perspectives, Indigenous First Nations perspectives, then you really, you have to weave that throughout the whole year, not just on those significant cultural events that occur. As an educator, I think that teachers do have to really have a clear understanding of our First Peoples, our First Nations history, because if you don't understand what happened with colonisation and how that impacted our people, not only then, but today, and you mentioned transgenerational trauma, but there's so much more where our young people are impacted. You know, an example of that, I guess, is that stolen wages. If you don't understand what stolen wages is, then you really do need to understand, because many of our old people never had access to their wages. They were paid minimal, and minimal means some tea and some sugar. So therefore, it then created that poverty, the cycle of poverty. So it's really important as an educator that you actually understand what that history is, understanding who those First Nations students in your school are, and ensuring that you're not referencing resources from First Nations people in Canada. You know, you've got Indigenous people in your community, you've got First Nations students in front of you. So really forming those genuine relationships is really what needs to happen, to understand that story and the stories of those people and their communities. Also, I think by having those foundations that I mentioned, I think it avoids assumptions, because if we all know that there were 250 different languages, well, obviously there's all different cultures within that as well. So it's really important, again, about making that, making those connections, building a safe place for our students to be able to share their story, because they won't share if they don't feel safe. So it's about building that relationship, embedding the Indigenous perspectives and knowledges into the curriculum. There are Indigenous teachings are in the curriculum, so it's really important that that responsibility is taken to ensure that they are being embedded in correctly as well. So you can see I'm really passionate about this side. So really important that, you know, those sharing of stories, as Vincent, as you have mentioned before, those stories are, you know, through oral, on-country experiences, through plays, dance, music, you know, it's all out there. It's really about tapping into that and ensuring that is woven throughout the curriculum. And I think, you know, for First Nations people, we are definitely there as a link, and we can link people up to community. And then that's when the relationship really builds, because the relationship is from the educator to the community then. It doesn't have to always go through the First Nations person. That's from me.
Thank you. Marlon, Vincent, yes?
Yeah, I was looking at a question from Maria and also from Aisha. I hope I pronounced them properly. Is there a resource to share sacramental formation culturally respectfully in First Nation students? Myself and my boss here at work, we came across a, because we're often asked, that same question, do we find resources? And NATSIG offloads resources on their website, but we found a really good resource coming from the New South Wales Catholic Ministry, Aboriginal Catholic Ministry, or Newcastle Catholic Ministry. And it was very, very detailed. It didn't represent all of Aboriginal people, but it represented how their ministry uses sacramental, like smoking ceremonies and things that within the church. But it also talked about the contributions of what elders do in their community, and also how they try and address reconciliation, and even with the modern topic of the Uluru Statement of the Heart. So, you know, truth telling and creating a voice. So I recommend probably, the question just got sprung up just now, and the thought just came to me now, but I don't have that resource in front of me. But if you maybe might want to type in that in a Google search, the New South Wales Catholic Ministry or Newcastle, I believe that it's more directed to the Newcastle diocese. Yeah, in Melbourne, in Victoria, there's an Aboriginal ministry, Catholic ministry, through Auntie Cheryl Balcombe. I think it's a sub Preston, I think, or somewhere in that particular region. But Cheryl Balcombe, and you will find her name if you go to the NATSIC website, because she is one of the councillors for NATSIC, and she represents Melbourne and Victoria. So maybe if you go through that particular website and introduce yourself all to the councillors and find questions for them to answer, and whether they come back to you or not. But it's a start, I guess. It might lead you in the right direction, or you might find an address if you're coming from this is for Suzanne. If you're coming from Melbourne, an address, they might invite you to their ministry, and then you get to witness through their mass how they celebrate. We know here in Brisbane, I invited someone today. Ours begins at the 2nd of July. We have a big, huge mass at St. Stephen's Cathedral, where we impose we do culture mass, not the traditional Catholic way, but we do it our way. And we open the mass up for everyone to come join in. So if you happen to be in Brisbane around 2nd of July before NAIDOC, the official celebration of Aboriginal Culture Week, then that's how we begin our week, with that mass. So they're kind of resources, and with that it comes interaction, which then can lead you off to other forms of chasing knowledge.
They do have some. I've just shared the Aboriginal Catholic Ministry Victoria website. There are some resources on there that could be useful as well. So thank you. Vincent,
to add on with, to add on what Marlon's talking about, we do have Aboriginal mass here. We call it the Kimberley. You can also find it on the NATSIC line. It's Auntie Shirley is one of us from Western Australia. She's on the NATSIC board. Our mass is just what we bring from our community, and most of it's in language, which is mixed from the whole Kimberleys of WA, and we all put in each part of the service in our own language. But because we all know each other's neighboring language, we all participate in it. So some may be singing the language in the songs during the service. Some may speak the gospel in service or the acclamation, and even bringing up the gifts. So it's what you can do to bring it to your mass or your service, and changing it to suit your area.
Thanks. Thank you, Vincent. Just finally, and I'm conscious of time, and we've got about 3 minutes left, but my last question was really going to be about, just with the voice referendum coming up later in the year, just from your perspective, what are some of the ways that Catholic schools can engage and mobilise students, teachers and families to support a positive outcome for First Nations people with that referendum?
I think through education of what it is and where it came from, and what it means for people, and the alignment of that with our Catholic social teachings. It's at the heart of who we are as Catholics. So, to lend to support, or to talk about that subsidiarity, and how people are need a voice, and we support that.
And I guess I was looking it up, and I thought, there's just so much politics about it. But really, the simple question is the amendment of 128 in the Constitution of alter the Constitution to recognise First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve this proposed amendment? So it's quite simple, isn't it? It's quite a simple question. So I really think it's really about leadership teams, schools taking that responsibility to understand, well, what is the voice about? Well, what's the Makarrata about, so that people then are informed, because it's a simple question.
I think with the way media portrays it, that it has become very political, but we're forgetting what the actual Uluru statement from the heart represents, and it represents people. It represents solutions for ongoing trauma, intergenerational trauma, how we want to address our youth and lead them to a right direction. But also it's about self-determination, and we're thinking about it in a political and how it probably could affect us economy in the economy and stuff like that, rather than thinking of it in an empathetical way or a sincere way of us as people when it comes to dealing with it's not us there to tell you what's right or wrong. It's just there about listening. That's the concept of it. Its concept is about truth telling, and when we actually listen to one another's stories, we are more clear as to what direction to when coming to help. Not and it's not all about just helping. It's just about listening. It's about being sincere. Because I know when I listen to someone's story, I walk away with thoughts and and images in my head, and when I'm dealing with those particular situations again, I try and find the solution, but I use the thoughts and feelings of it, to help me guide into what's right and just. And we as Catholics are right about being right and just. It's written in our prayers, and we should be compassionate. It's written in all. It's what we are taught through our sacraments. So it's about being just, being justice to the right people, and it's not about they're making it a black versus white thing, but it really isn't. It's just about people. Remember, it's a statement from the heart. It's not a political statement from the heart. It's an actual calling out from the heart, what we are yearning for, how we need to fix these problems. We're talking from the heart. We're not talking in another way. And truth telling is about attaching yourselves to one's heart and being one in heart, and listening with your heart. There's probably some of the phrases that we use when we're in the church.
Thank you. Thanks, Marlon. Vincent, is there anything you wanted to add?
I think it's what those two have said, it's listening and being and feeling what you feel. And having your voice to speak out and sharing and taking away, as Marlon said, taking away what your thought and feeling of hearing other people's conversation.
Thank you. Look, and thank you. Well, it's been a pleasure listening to you for the last hour or so, and I really appreciate all of you giving up your time to be with us today. So thanks so much to each of you. I know we've had quite a few people here. I'm conscious of time, so we won't keep people much longer, but just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today, and thanks to our speakers. I'll just